So just a few words about who Alfred Meyer is. I've known Alfred for well over a decade now. When I met him, he was the executive director of Physicians for Social Responsibility in Wisconsin. The chapter was founded by Dr. Patterson, and Alfred can talk more about that. And over the years, Alfred has served as the chairman and secretary of Friends of Chernobyl Centers US, which works with sister organizations in Ukraine after the Chernobyl nuclear catastrophe. And most recently, Alfred joined the board of directors for Physicians for Social Responsibility at the national level. So I'm honored to introduce to you Alfred Meyer.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and thank you all for coming out tonight. It's, I think, appropriate that this is on Valentine's Day because it is, in one sense, about love for the universe, about love of life, about love of the Great Lakes, the beautiful state of Wisconsin, and so I think it's appropriate that we're here on this day. It was my great honor to fill in Dr. Patterson's stead. He was truly a remarkable man. He not only was a leader in PSR, this was the second time he had been president of the board. He also still was a practicing physician with many, many patients who dearly loved him. He also is, or was, the leading authority on prolotherapy. It's a kind of treatment for chronic pain. He both taught around the world to share this technique with other physicians. He also would lead large groups of physicians to Honduras and Mexico to provide free medical care for people. Any one of those activities, in my mind, would constitute a full lifetime's activity. And yet Jeff not only did all four of those things, but as Kevin said, he was willing to come here for a week to talk to you folks and to carry on this work here in Michigan. And I think his compassion, his caring for people and the earth and to foster health is really an example that we all can follow. So it's my great honor to be here. I've taken the title that he and Kevin came up with, nuclear power, what you need to know about price, pollution, and proliferation. And Jeff and I oftentimes talk about these topics, so I do feel that I have a good sense of what he had in mind, although the presentation I'm going to give you tonight will be in my words. I will talk about this, and then I really look forward to a discussion afterwards. I'd like to have an exchange of ideas and to see what we can come up with and how to move forward. And I must say that I'm just thrilled at the turnout here and the commitment that all of you have. And so I really want to encourage you, and I hope that my talk tonight will foster your efforts. I want to start out, first of all, with a couple of basic concepts to kind of give a frame for tonight's discussion. One thing that Dr. Patterson always talked about is this whole nuclear adventure that we're in the midst of is, in fact, a non-consensual, unplanned, and poorly done human experiment about the effects of irradiating the environment and the living beings in it. You know, if you as a physician want to do an experiment at a medical school, there are very rigorous standards you have to meet and permissions you have to get, and you have to make it consensual. So if you want to sign up to be in a human experiment, you know what you're signing up for, you know what the risks are, and you can make that a conscious decision. We as a population are not given that benefit. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind at the beginning. And the name of our organization, Physicians for Social Responsibility, implies the sense of responsibility. And so I, in part, want to challenge you tonight about, do you accept the path that we're on? Because if we don't do something, we're going to end up where we're headed. And from our perspective, that's not a very good place to be. And the other thing I want to talk about is that the whole point of nuclear power, or operating a nuclear reactor, is to boil water.
Yeah.
And when we talk, and all the things I talk about, in the back of my mind is, we're a pretty smart species. Is this the best way we can think of to boil water? But let's talk about electricity for just a minute, because I like electricity. I like having heat. I like having light. I use a computer. I'm kind of a gadgeteer, so it's not that I'm saying we need to go back to the caves and do away with all this stuff. But I think that there are many options for us to have a good quality of life, in fact, a better quality of life, with different choices. So electricity can be made directly from sunlight with photovoltaic solar panels. But most ways that we generate electricity these days are by turning a generator. And even there are many ways to turn generators. You can do it with a wind turbine. You can do it with hydro power. Be it a large dam, is what people used to do in the older days. And now there are many ideas about small generators that you could anchor in a river, so that the current going by turns it, or you can put it in areas where there's tidal action and harness that energy of the water going back and forth. And then many systems depend on the thermal heat, which is to make steam to turn these generators. Now, coal is a very common way to make such steam, and that's very damaging to the health of the environment and to humans. It also releases great amounts of greenhouse gas, and our organization feels that climate change, like nuclear weapons, like nuclear reactors, is a grave threat to the survival of humans on Earth. So we need to get rid of greenhouse gases. Coal also puts out mercury, acid rain, particulate matters, many damaging aspects. Natural gas is a little better on the greenhouse gas emissions, but it still contributes them. And we're very concerned that fracking is in no way the answer to our energy needs, that this is a different kind of dangers. It's for a different discussion than tonight, but I just really want to be clear that we do not in any way condone fracking. It has many health risks. It's like the danger of a nuclear meltdown. With fracking, you're endangering our water supplies. We need water for life. So this is a bad idea. And what I'm going to really focus on tonight, of course, is nuclear reactor operations. There are inherent dangers in operating them and radioactive consequences. And as I said already, it's to boil water. So I also want to comment that reactors were conceived of, designed, built, and operated first and foremost to make the materials for nuclear weapons. So there's always this inherent link between nuclear power and nuclear weapons. This is something Dr. Patterson was deeply convinced of and deeply committed to changing the dangers from both. And what we read about in the newspaper frequently about Iran illustrates this point, I think, quite well. Iran is claiming that they're just fulfilling their inalienable right through the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to have nuclear energy, peaceful nuclear energy. But our country and many others are so terribly concerned about the fact that nuclear reactors are the path to nuclear weapons. The Manhattan Project, which was started in 1942 to build nuclear bombs, was seen as a race for survival. We were very worried that Nazi Germany, which was taking over Europe at the time, was going to develop some new super weapon that would allow them to, in fact, conquer the whole world and spread the horrors of Nazi Germany throughout the world. So the Manhattan Project started in great secrecy. Actually, in 1942, it created an industrial infrastructure the same size as the then automobile industry. So this is a massive industrial undertaking to to create a nuclear weapon. And when it was done, the top priority, unquestioned top priority, was to get the bomb built as fast as we could. There was little thought given to the environmental consequences, little thought to the health consequences, little thought about what to do with waste. We needed to get a bomb quick. And now we're left with the residues of what that action produced. And I would mention that the concept of allowable radioactive exposure, and I want to point out, I'm not saying safe levels of exposure, I'm saying allowable levels, because no level is safe. But these levels were designed for what's called the standard man. And you can think of this as the man working in a bomb factory, that we wanted to make sure that those men didn't get sick. We wanted them to be able to keep making bombs. But we know now very clearly that women and fetuses and small children are much more sensitive to radioactivity than are men. In fact, they're 10 times more sensitive. And so PSR is supporting the efforts of the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research to get these standards changed. They really should be reduced by a factor of 10 for allowable releases, or allowable exposure. And it turns out from stemming from the Manhattan Project that it started in secrecy, and I think it's fair to say that the nuclear industry today operates with a great deal of secrecy. When secrecy doesn't work, cover-up is the next step.
Yeah.
And when cover-up doesn't work, there's minimization. I would note that the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, which reports to the General Assembly, has issued a summary of their report on the health impacts of Fukushima. And what they say is no discernible effects. No discernible effects. Now, in fact, the way they've looked at it, that statement is true. Now, I could go into details about why it's the wrong way to look at things, that the main problem is you would not expect to see effects for 2 or 3 years. So they went out and collected data for 1 year. And it's like if I told you that Santa Claus will be out in the hall in 20 minutes and asked you to, in 10 minutes to go out and look, you'd come back and say, I don't see him. That'd be true. But I ask, is it honest? And so I don't think that these reports we're getting really are fully honest. So this is how it's minimized. The Unscare Report 2 says things like the radiation released is barely above background levels. And again, how you choose to look at it, that could be a true statement, but it really is not an honest statement. Likewise, they say the biggest health effect comes from fear. And if you're worried about radiation, that's the biggest problem. But I asked them, how could they honestly look at a family with a child with thyroid cancer and say there's no discernible effect? Statistically speaking, it might not be a big effect. But for each family, each individual, each community, it's a huge effect. So I think we need to kind of adjust how we talk about these things. And PSR, in fact, has done a critique of this Unscare report. And as soon as we got it done, in conjunction with the German chapter of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, we sent this report to the Unscare Committee. And we're trying to work with them, and we're trying to change the committee report. And the chairman of the committee has told me that they've addressed our concerns in their final report. I'll be very curious to see how well they've done that once the final report's out. Now, I said that I was going to talk about price, pollution, and proliferation. So let me start with price. Let me count the ways that we pay for nuclear power. First of all, in 1953, Lewis Strauss, who was the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission at the time, made the statement that perhaps some of you recall, and that is, he said, nuclear power will produce electricity too cheap to meter. Now, the fact of the matter is, at the time that Mr. Strauss made that statement, he had in his possession a report from the government that was looking into the feasibility of nuclear power. You know what that the government report said? The biggest problem with nuclear power is cost. So right from the get-go, there's been a deception. So this is why Jeff always talks about secrecy, cover-up, minimization. Another way we pay for the nuclear industry is through the nuclear infrastructure that's been making these atomic bombs for the last 72 years. And then with nuclear power, I describe it as being an odd form of nuclear socialism. And what I mean by this is that the industry has managed to socialize the risks, to spread the risks over everybody, but it privatizes the profit. Now, how do they do this? They do it through nuclear loan guarantees for construction of new plants. You would think that if nuclear power is as good as the industry says it is, that Wall Street's smart money would be rushing to invest, right? Not true. The people who value their money, they say this is not a good investment, so the taxpayer is saddled with the risk. If there's a profit, though, the profit goes to the corporation. If there's a default, we cover it. Now, in 2007, Congress appropriated $18.5 billion for such nuclear loan guarantees. This was an effort to foster the so-called nuclear renaissance. Of course, it's Peter Bradford, the next NRC commissioner, who has the quip of, if it's a nuclear renaissance, show me a masterpiece, because there aren't any. But it's, to this day, 7 years later, not a penny of that $18.5 billion that's been sitting on the table has been spent by the industry. Now, we might any day now have the very first nuclear loan guarantee concluded in Georgia with the Southern Company, but the discussion there has been all about how much risk should the company take. The government, to their credit, saying this is a risky proposition, the corporation needs to have some skin in the game. The corporation saying, no, we don't want to put too much of our money into this. So they're still bickering over this. Another way that nuclear socialism works is through construction work in progress. And this was attempted for the Fermi 3 plant, and the Michigan Public Service Commission denied the first request for such funding, but keep your eyes open because it may come back. What construction work in progress means, and this exists in Florida, in South Carolina, in Georgia, but in Iowa they tried to have this, and citizens rose up and opposed it. It was denied. So I want to encourage all of you that we can have victories in all of this. The construction work in progress allows the utility commission to raise rates, your utility rates, even if a company just wants to consider, they want to study whether or not they should build a new reactor. It's rather costly to do a detailed study, and the ratepayer pays. The corporation may decide to go ahead and build one. They might decide not to. They might start building it. They might get partway down the road. These things, the costs continue to escalate, so they might start partway. That's fine. The ratepayer's out the money. The corporation owes nothing, even if not a single electron of energy was ever delivered. What kind of other business works that way? And why, if we're being asked to take the risk, why shouldn't we share in the profit? I mean, I thought that's what capitalism is all about. That you can take a risk, and if you're doing a good thing and it's successful, then you benefit. But nuclear socialism doesn't work that way. So that's on the construction end. Now, on the operation end, who pays for the liability insurance? Again, the industry says it's such a safe mode of generating electricity. Why aren't the insurance companies rushing to sell policies to these companies? It's because it's too risky. Who carries the risk? We do. We pay for the liability insurance for the industry. Now, each reactor does have to contribute $100 million to a fund should there be an accident. And that's a lot of money for you and I. But compared to the cost of a nuclear disaster, that's peanuts. The bulk of the money would be hundreds of billions of dollars. And if it happens in my neighborhood, I live in New York City, if Indian Point goes up, it's going to be trillions of dollars. So again, it's the U.S. taxpayer who's saddling that burden. So to me, this, if you're an owner of a reactor, it's a pretty good deal. You've got somebody to cover the risk of building, somebody to pay your operating liability insurance, and lastly, the government takes possession of the waste, so they clean up